Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Our studio guest is Peet von Biljon, a former McKinsey consultant who specializes in ethics-driven innovation. And he's here to discuss his latest book, Profit with a Higher Purpose. Thanks for joining us, Peet.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
So tell us, what inspired you to write this type of business ethics book? And do you think it may have a limited audience because of the Christian angle?
So over my business career as an employee, a manager, an executive, and also a management consultant, I often saw things that bugged me. And I had this internal dialogue with myself about why these things bugged me. I asked myself, were they illegal? And fortunately, no, I've never been party to or seen anything illegal done in business, which is great. But it still bugged me. So I asked myself, is it against industry norms? Well, no, all the other companies are doing it too. And then, is it against some code of conduct? Well, not really. And then I said, but it's still bugging me. And I realized it was because it violated basic norms of right and wrong that I learned in Sunday school. So as I thought about this, I realized that most people, even those who go to church regularly on Sundays, compartmentalize their work and faith lives totally. They figure because they work for legal companies in legal industries in a civilized country, they don't really have to think so much about the right or wrong when they're at business. And that's not enough, because even if you're doing something that's ethical in business terms or legal, you could still be harming people. And so the book is really my inquiry into all the things that, all the decisions that executives make that really greatly affect customers, other stakeholders, suppliers, and so on.
Who were your role models growing up, and were you always spiritual?
I had a great role model. He was the executive chairman. My mother worked for him for 20 years as an EI. He was the executive chairman of the biggest property and casualty insurance company in South Africa. And I used to visit their office when I was on vacation, and I went shopping downtown Cape Town. I would stop by there. It was a very imposing office with soft plush carpets, and people spoke in hushed voices. And he would always, though, wanted to see me. And over the years, I gradually got to know him as not only a brilliant business person, but as a really deeply committed Christian who did a lot of good things for other people and never talked about it. So that was for me a very good role model. In terms of was I always spiritual? I grew up in a devout household. My father was an elder in the church and so on. But as I left the house and moved around, but there were times where I didn't go to church that much or didn't think about my faith as much as I should have. But I always believed, and I was always drawn back. So the last 12 years, we've found a very great church home where we are now at the United Methodist Church in McLean. And my senior pastor there, James Sprouse, actually helped me to write this book.
So what message would you like to convey to business leaders of all faiths about why they should read your book, and what do you hope they get out of it?
First of all, don't think of it as a business ethics book. People have an impression about what business ethics books are, that they're academic, they're philosophical, maybe they've been made to take an ethics course at some point. This book, I hope, is a lot more practical. It's written in modern business language. And it's really a leadership book. It's about making the right decisions and understanding that your decisions are very consequential for the people that you make these decisions for. So while I wrote from my own faith tradition, because that's where I get my principles from, humanity has really known the difference between right and wrong for thousands of years. The difficulty is doing the right thing where there are strong incentives, particularly money pulling you the other way. And I've found great encouragement from people of other faith traditions, as well as some friends I have who were of no faith tradition, who told me that they also want to believe in living a righteous life and doing right by other people. So I think this desire to do the right thing in business is much bigger than even where I'm coming from.
Talk about the do what you love career advice, and how can it negatively affect us both personally and professionally?
So in America, it was always considered virtuous to be hardworking. But the idea that you had to love your job is a new one. I think people from the World War II and Depression era would find that somewhat narcissistic. Where it apparently came in was when the baby boomers, who had the luxury of growing up in an era of great prosperity, also started thinking about self-fulfillment and what made them happy and so on. And somehow these two things combined, and companies actually started using that as a way to not only attract people but also to motivate people. The problem with that is that if you say, well, I want to be on this great project, it's going to be such a fun project to work on and it's so exciting, that 2 weeks later when you're working like 80, 90 hours a week, you can't complain. And psychologists tell us that it's actually, you cannot always expect to find happiness in everything you do, so you're setting yourself up for failure. The last thing I would say is there are many people who do dirty and unpleasant jobs, and we shouldn't take away from their dignity, even if we have a fun job, by bragging about it. But even the jobs that look like they're the most fun in the knowledge economy have tedious parts to it, they have boring parts and frustrating parts to it. So we should just be fortunate that we're able to do that work and realize that that's why somebody's paying us to do it.
But in talking to the millennial generation, they're all about, I want to love what I do, I want to be passionate, I'm not taking this job. And then when they do get in the workforce, they have this negative idea that, well, I don't like this anymore, that I'm not getting to be creative enough. So what do you want to say to them about loving your job, that this is something they feel that they deserve?
I would say love your vocation. You cannot find a purpose in life where you can serve your community while basically rewarding yourself, but don't expect every moment of it to be fun and games. It never will be, not on this earth.
How do we avoid falling victim to the parable, which you talk about in chapters 2 and 3, of the rich fool when trying to save for retirement? What is that all about?
So the rich fool in the parable had a bumper crop, and he was very pleased with it. He decided to build bigger barns to house all his grain. And then he said to himself, I'm going to retire now. I'm just going to relax, eat, drink, be merry, not worry about anything. And in the parable, God says, you fool, tonight I will take your soul, and what will happen to your earthly possessions then? So the folly of the fool was that he put everything, all his soul, into his earthly possessions. And this was a folly in two parts. Number one, vertically, he basically declared independence from God. He said, I don't need God, I have my barns full of grain. And horizontally, he wasn't actually contributing to society. All that grain was locked up in barns. He was a hoarder. He wasn't actually putting it to any productive use. So as unsettling as it may be for people who want to save for retirement, the sin isn't saving for retirement. The sin is putting your soul, your heart and soul, into the accumulation of wealth. So if you are wealthy, use that to help other people, and don't get arrogant. That's, to me, is the lesson from this parable.
Why is it so difficult for organizations to find competent managers?
Well, there's been some unsettling research from Gallup that where they basically defined 5 quite reasonable talents or traits of competent managers, and then they found that only 1 in 10 people seem to have it. Now, even if it's not that bleak, I think organizations make a number of other mistakes too when they look for these good managers. They don't acknowledge that the needs of the organization changes. So the kind of strong leader you need, take no prisoners guy when you're a startup, isn't the kind of guy you need when or woman you need when you're trying to grow the company into the next phase. They often try and replicate themselves. They look for people who are like them, or like the previous executive who was in charge. That's a big mistake. So there's a number of these mistakes that companies make, and there's also research that shows that people who seem very confident actually get way more credit for it than they should. So they tend to go with whoever looks more confident rather than the most competent person. And we need to basically look for more diversity in our management. We need to look for the hidden gems. We need to be very open-minded as we look for new leaders.
But how difficult is it to get them to shift away from the company's bottom line, which they're responsible for, and balance the two? To be the benevolent boss.
So first of all, I think there's always discretion involved. As in this story that I mentioned, I had the managerial discretion, to basically go from the default position and do something different. So I would say, first of all, within your spectrum of discretion, try and make the calls in the way that favors people over the bottom line. You still have to be a good custodian of the bottom line, but there's so much research that shows that employees who are well treated are more loyal and are more productive, that the trade-off isn't as big as people think it is.
Can you share a personal story with us when you embraced Jesus's ultimate leadership principles within an organization that you were involved with?
So when I grew up, my dad had serious health problems, and he didn't have a lazy bone in his body. He loved going to work, but his health was keeping him from going to work. And just as he would get better and he would be so happy to go to work, he would again have a setback, and then he couldn't. So eventually his employer got impatient with it, and they forced him to go off early on pension, which was a disability pension. So fast forward some decades later and an ocean away, I was leading a group of people, and there was this gentleman on my group, middle-aged, school-aged kids, who started suffering health problems. And we accommodated him. He was allowed to work from home. He came in sometimes, and he was so happy when he was well enough to come in. It kind of reminded me of my dad when I was growing up. And then eventually, it was clear that he was really struggling. So HR came to me and they said to me, we recommend we take this person off payroll and we put him on long-term disability insurance. And I couldn't help but kept thinking about my dad, and I said, well, you know what, he wants to keep on working for as long as possible. And since you're giving me the final say, I'm going to actually say, let's keep him on. And I thought about how you can translate this to a more general principle. I think, Jesus said, treat people as you want to be treated yourself. That's the golden rule. But a lot of the executives, as we speak about in the book, are workaholics. They're very hard on themselves. So maybe extend that principle to say, treat people in the workplace as you would like your family to be treated. Treat that young woman or man who's just looking for their first break, like your son or daughter. Treat the woman who's looking stressed and tired, like your wife who may be caring for elderly parents. And yes, treat the middle-aged man whose productivity is suffering because of health, like your dad.
So how can business leaders and executives help break the cycle of overwork and family neglect in our society?
Well, one of the things they can do is to first understand that the research says that people aren't very productive when they're overworked. There's clear evidence that if you go much beyond, say, 50 hours or so a week, that your productivity declines to the point where you're actually not adding any value. The second thing is they should set an example themselves. The employees follow the cues of the leaders. So, simple thing, go home at a reasonable time at night, walk around, say good night to people, tell them to go home. If they tell you they can't go home because they have too much work, then look into that.
I've never worked in an environment like that. Have you?
I've worked in it once or twice, and I've tried to set that example. Right. So again, we know this is an insurgency we trying to start here. Because the evidence is that, as I said, that people are more productive when they're not tired. So you're not really taking away much from the company. You're taking away from a culture that's got us into this cycle of overwork and face time and more is better.
So can you share a case study with us in which a business was able to successfully change their business goals and strategies in order to level the playing field and not really exploit others in the process?
So I very much like the economics of mutuality work that Mars Incorporated has been doing over the last number of years. And that's based on the idea that the community's human and social capital should also be increased while the business is being done, and the increases in financial capital should be shared between the company and a number of stakeholders like suppliers and so on. About 5 years ago, the Mars Wrigley division in Kenya in Eastern Africa tried a pilot project of something that has rarely been done. They wanted to address the bottom of the pyramid consumers. So they went where most multinationals wouldn't go, into the urban slums of Nairobi, into small rural villages, and they were trying to create a new channel to market for their chewing gum products. And they had a factory in Kenya. They would work through the factory, and a master distributor who would just deliver to standard retail locations. But this was a total different game plan. What they basically did was to get people in these poor communities to be the deliverers of the product, literally people on bicycles. They helped them to get microloans to buy bicycles. They would pick chewing gum up every day from stocking points. They would sell it to the smallest hawkers and vendors. And they built a whole ecosystem around this. They involved NGOs, they involved citizens organizations, they did training. And there were a lot of moving parts to this, but the great news story is it was a great success that some of these people at bicycles started buying motorcycles because they had more deliveries to do. They allowed them to carry other products. They weren't being overly exclusive, so people remained loyal. And in the end, it opened up a multi-million-dollar new market for them that they didn't have before.
In Chapter 7, you talk about companies being slaves to the revenue god. Can you explain this and then also share an example of companies behaving this way to the detriment of their customers and employees?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is that revenue targets are obviously very important in companies, and that not only salespeople carry revenue targets, of course they do, but above a certain level, all executives pretty much have some targets that are revenue related, certainly all the way up to the CEO. So at the same time, maximizing revenue can in some cases harm people. So now you have this conflict between the incentives and what may be the right thing to do. And what I mean by maximizing revenue could harm people, there are clear instances of dangerous products sold to vulnerable people, and tobacco is one of them. The asbestos industry, which refuses to die, is another example of harmful products. Then there's more subtle and harder things to handle where overconsumption by some of your most loyal customers is harmful. Alcohol is an example of that. Video games is another example that I talk about in the book. A third way in which your chase of revenue could harm customers is price gouging. Many examples on essential medicines that where the prices get hiked and people can't afford the medicines to get well. So there are many of these temptations that one ought to resist, even as one tries to build a sustainable revenue for the company.
So how can companies like Keurig, who embrace innovations like the coffee pods that everyone just jumped on the bandwagon, that are now monopolizing our landfills to the tune of, I think in your book you said, $13 billion a year clogging up our landfills, how can they help mitigate environmental damage and still maximize their revenues and bottom line?
Best thing to do, obviously, is not to do the damage in the first place. To consider up front, as you're designing, as you're innovating the product, what the effect will be, how it will be disposed of in this case. And the original inventor of the Keurig pot actually feels very badly about it now. And Keurig, to their credit, is trying to phase out the pots that can't be recycled, but it's an uphill battle. One of the reactions I had to the book is people actually asked me, well, if I do all these things that you advocate in the book, what will happen to my business? Won't my business model suffer? And I said, well, I'm an innovation guy. That's what I do consulting for on a day-to-day basis, and I see a solution to this problem. You need to build in the ethical dimensions as constraints to your innovation process. People think that out-of-the-box innovation means no constraints, but you don't get very good innovation that way. You get very good innovation if you have some good constraints that actually spurn creativity. And so the thing to do is you can put environmental conditions as constraints, you can put paying people living wages as constraints, and you can basically come up with innovations that in the first place do not cause these problems. And you can also innovate your way out of trouble. You could say, for example, I'm selling burgers for $1 a piece, but I hate that I can't pay my cooks a living wage. Can I sell hamburgers that people are willing to pay $4 or $5 for? What would that burger need to look like? And then I can pay my cooks a living wage. These are the kinds of things you can do with innovation.
So how can CEOs and CFOs avoid unethical cost-saving business practices? And can you share a case study or an example?
So in the book, I write about bad cost-saving practices, things like cheating customers in unethical but in legal ways. There are ways to do that. Squeezing workers, squeezing suppliers, and imposing costs on society that you don't want to bear as a company, like pollution and so on. If you look at where these things go wrong, it's because of the desire of short-term profits. Because in the long run, you cannot get away by squeezing and cheating people like that. People want to stop doing business with you. They'll get wise to it. They'll find ways of recovering the cost from you, or governments will catch up with you with regulation. So it all comes down to this short-term motive. If you take a longer-term view of profitability and trying to grow long-term profits, you're going to not make these short-sighted decisions around cost-cutting in the short run.
So during recessions, as we know, companies tend to lay off workers. Can you discuss some of the myths as to why organizations think this is actually good for their bottom line?
Business leaders who are responsible for layoffs often just look at the spreadsheet, and sometimes they just think of people as factors of production. And aside from that being wrong in ethical terms, because you're dealing with human beings, they're also being short-sighted around the true cost to the company of making layoffs. For example, you're losing tacit knowledge, you're losing a lot of understanding about how processes and so on in the company work. You have very harmful effects on the people who remain. The idea that the people who remain will be so fearful that they'll be more productive is not true. There's been research that showed that they basically go into a survivor stress mode, and as a result, quality suffers, customer service suffers, and all sorts of other problems happen within your company. The knowledge exchange stops. People don't work well when they're that fearful. So companies need to consider the whole picture before they do these layoffs.
Talk to us a little about the impact of new technologies like artificial intelligence and its impact on highly skilled professionals in the workplace. And is there something these professionals can do to arm themselves against being obsolete eventually in the workplace?
So I think about artificial intelligence a lot because I'm also involved in setting ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence through IEEE. The thing to understand about what artificial intelligence and automation is doing is it is taking away the routine jobs. So we've been seeing that in manufacturing a lot, but also in administrative functions. Routine means things that are repetitive, that are predictable. So as you think about how to arm yourself against not being replaced by some machine or robot, think about how much of your current role is routine and potentially at risk, and think about the things that you could rather do where a human being is not easily replaced by a machine. Things like human relationships, integrating knowledge from many sources, having creative insights, having the human touch. All these things robots can't do as well as us. Unfortunately, for the last 100 years, since Frederick Taylor did all his great work and started pushing efficiencies and so on, in a way we've made humans in a workplace behave more and more like robots. And you will never beat a robot if you're trying to out-robot the robot. But human beings have to go back to what makes us human.
Talk about the dramatic shift of the shareholder primacy paradigm and why many corporations and CEOs are turning against this model that you discuss in Chapter 10.
So the shareholder primacy model is the idea that corporations have to maximize profits and returns to their shareholders, that the shareholders are the owners of the company, that the management of the company, CEO and so on down, are actually the agents of the shareholders. Now, if what I just said sounds to you like, something that's self-evident, a lot of people who've been through business schools in the last 20, 30, 40 years would say that. But it's actually not. There's always been another school of thought about what companies are there to do in society. And in the early part of the 20th century through to the years after the Second World War, up to the 70s, this has been the prevailing school of thought, that companies contribute to society by hiring people, by making great products for their customers and helping other stakeholders as well. So fortunately, the pendulum is swinging back again to the more balanced idea of what a company is there to do for society. For many years now, due to the success of Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics, people have taken the shareholder primacy paradigm as gospel. But one of the most prominent people to recant has been Jack Welch, which said it's the stupidest, the dumbest idea ever. We've had people like Jack Ma saying, from Alibaba, saying customers come first, employees second, and shareholders third. So there's a lot of very influential people in business now who are arguing the other way. And therefore I'm hopeful that the tide is turning on this paradigm, and that in the next decade or so we'll see more and more companies, and hopefully the business schools also, starting to teach the more balanced approach.
As opposed to shareholders are number one. So.
As opposed to shareholders are number one, because shareholders, first of all, the idea that shareholders are owners of the company, as I show in the book, is not accurate. The idea that managers are the agents, is also not accurate. The idea, so the shareholder primacy model is actually, not consistent logically within itself even.
So can you share a case study with us of a company that has successfully debunked this whole shareholder value myth?
Company one thinks of immediately who's very open that they don't care about profits and short-term profits at least, is Amazon. In the famous 1997 letter to shareholders, Jeff Bezos said, we're going to do exactly that, and they've done very well. Now, there are other areas of how Amazon conducts its business that are perhaps not so consistent with some of the principles I wrote about in the book, like how the people are treated who work in the warehouses and so on. But this at least shows you that there's a way that you can say to the market, I'm not going to go to optimize short-term profits. You see it more in private companies. The German Mittelstand companies, for example, are mostly family-owned, and they hand it off from generation to generation. They have a very long-term view. They have CEOs with tenures of 20 years and so on. And they excellently run in ways that you may expect. But the one thing that they do differently is that they don't chase unsustainable revenue. So they smooth out their revenue over time. If you chase, a lot of revenue during an upswing in the economy, when the inevitable downswing comes, you're going to have to lay off people. So what they're doing is they are a lot more careful in terms of how they go after revenue. And the interesting thing is a comparison done between those medium-sized companies in Germany and large public companies have shown that consistently over decades, these Mittelstand family-owned companies make more profit than the publicly owned companies. So if you're looking for evidence to debunk the idea that you always have to maximize revenues and profits, especially in the short run, that's as good as any.
Now, do you think it's like these family businesses are successful because of their ethic values towards their family members who will be taking over the company? Does that have something to do with it? That they're looking towards the future instead of strictly the bottom line?
It has a lot to do with it because they're almost obsessed with it. They don't use the word leadership as much as they use the word responsibility. So they see themselves as custodian of an enterprise that they want to have almost live forever and hand over to the next generation in a good condition.
So what advice would you give to companies, governments, and business executives who have crossed that ethical line for the bottom line? And is this behavior the new normal now? And share a case study if you could.
The advice is simple, but it's not easy. So number one, stop doing what you're doing that's harming people, and stop doing it today, not tomorrow or next year. Number two, make restitution to those that you have harmed. And number three, put in place procedures and change your decision-making processes so that you don't make those kinds of decisions again. An example, even though this was brought about by a lot of government pressure, is the Deepwater Horizon disaster that BP had in 2010, where they ultimately did the right thing. They put like $20 billion towards cleanup and restitution to people who were harmed. They put in place new processes and new safety procedures and so on to prevent this from happening again. So this can be done. Where there's a will, there is a way. And by the way, what the BP example shows you there, it's a lot cheaper to actually not do the damage. Your company could face an existential threat from large claims if you're not careful.
So have you noticed unethical companies behaving more ethical because of the impact of social media?
I think there's certainly been an impact in social media. It's hard to keep anything undercover for a while, and if social media jumps on it, then you have to defend yourself. I think social media is also selective in the kind of things that it jumps on. So it may be that some things social media are very good at basically putting pressure on companies. For other things are maybe not as visible to social media because not a lot of people may know about it, and or it may be too technical for it to become a meme or to be tweetable on social media, and so those things could still be slipping through the cracks.
So are you hopeful for the future as the millennials start to embrace leadership roles and of their mantra of doing good, as they take leadership roles in business and government and not-for-profits? How are you feeling about that? So
I'm always hopeful for the future. You know, in youth there is hope, and with generational change there's hope. I'm a little mindful though, because the baby boomer generation also had a lot of these same ideals, and then they eventually, as they got closer and they could smell the leather seats in the corner office, they got co-opted. So I think the best way for the new generation to avoid that fate of totally getting co-opted by the system is to have very well-grounded principles upon which they want to conduct their business. And I hope that the book that I've written helps them by presenting one such framework that they could follow.
Pete, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Well, it's been great being here. Thank you so much.
And that does it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.